Let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're going to uncover something truly fascinating together. We're looking at how ancient mystic poetry actually functions as a hidden, highly advanced spiritual technology. We usually think of philosophy as something pretty dry, right? Built entirely on rigorous logic, cold debates, maybe some really thick textbooks. But what if the deepest truths of the universe weren't argued into existence but sung? Today we're exploring the Alvars. They were a group of ancient mystics who didn't just study the divine, they experienced it, vividly. In rivers, in trees, in the eyes of strangers, and in that really profound ache of human longing.
Before Ramanuja built temples of stone, the Alvars built temples of sound. That quote perfectly captures the essence of our journey today. You've likely heard of the great Hindu philosopher Ramanuja, famous for his monumental theological frameworks and, of course, building up physical institutions of worship. But his entire philosophical system, Vishishtadvaita, was heavily seeded by something way less tangible. Centuries before him, the Alvars encoded a massive, complex philosophical data stream into pure, unfiltered emotion. They literally turned the universe into a love song, and that very song became the foundation of Ramanuja's teachings.
Okay, let's dive into this. Seriously, imagine a worldview where logic takes a backseat to melody and rhythm. The Alvars were true visionaries who saw the divine absolutely everywhere in nature. For them, spirituality wasn't some abstract concept you sit around and debate. It was a living, breathing reality that had to be felt. They bypassed those traditional, rigid, intellectual pathways completely and instead used the massive emotional voltage of poetry to transmit absolute truth.
Section 1. Who were the Alvars?
To understand this massive paradigm shift, we've got to look at the architects behind it. History records exactly 12 of these Alvars, 12 distinct, luminous figures living in South India between the 5th and 9th centuries. Now, 12 might sound like a pretty small number, but the cultural and spiritual footprint they left behind, monumental. These 12 individuals almost single-handedly shaped the emotional and relational heart of Ramanuja's foundational Hindu philosophy. And this brilliantly illustrates one of the most radical things about them, their absolute diversity. We're talking about kings and warriors, sure, but also farmers, women, and folks who were completely outcast by the rigid social structures of their time. They bypassed traditional caste and educational barriers entirely. They weren't united by their social standing or formal scholarly training. They were united purely by their direct, ecstatic, embodied experience of the divine.
Together, these 12 incredibly diverse voices compose the Nalayira Divya Prabandham. That's a collection of exactly 4,000 sacred hymns. But hey, don't just think of these as beautifully written poems. They're more like a literal transmission of devotion. If you were standing in a village square back then, lit by oil lamps, listening to devotees sing these verses, you wouldn't just be hearing literature. You would feel a palpable, buzzing, emotional voltage right there in the air.
Section 2. 5 Pillars of Devotion.
These hymns didn't just stay in those village squares, though. They went on to revolutionize high theology. Let's move on and see how this builds. There's a structured breakdown of 5 radical influences these poets had on philosophy: intimate presence, divine theater, equality, divine longing, and sacred language. Let's break these down one by one. First up is intimate presence. The Alvars flat out refused to describe God as some distant, unreachable, abstract force. No way. They engaged with the divine directly, as a lover, a friend, a mischievous child, a mother, or a beloved companion. It's a powerful contrast, right? They were bringing the infinite down to the dinner table, so to speak. And that intimate relationship became the relational core of Ramanuja's entire metaphysical system.
Our second pillar is this beautiful concept of the world as divine theater. The Alvars didn't look at the physical world as some illusion that we all need to escape. Instead, they saw the universe as God's play, God's body, even God's fragrance. It's fascinating because it really reveals these poets as early ecological mystics, way before the concept of ecology was even a thing. They taught Ramanuja that the physical universe is entirely real, deeply sacred, and vividly alive.
Now, the third influence is maybe their most socially radical: equality through devotion. Because the Alvars themselves came from literally every caste, their poetry boldly declared that the Lord lives equally in the hearts of all people, even those that society deemed untouchable. This spiritual realization didn't just stay floating in the clouds. Mysticism actively became social reform. And this deeply inclusive ethic, it became the solid moral backbone of Ramanuja's later teachings.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the fourth pillar, the concept of virha, or divine longing. We usually think of separation, yearning, and longing as painful, right? Like weaknesses. But the Alvars, they perfected this burning separation as an actual spiritual technology. They used the ache of ecstatic union and surrender as an energetic propulsion system. It was designed to constantly pull the human soul toward the infinite. Ramanuja actually adopted this intense emotional state as a deliberate method to keep the practitioner's heart perpetually open. The fifth and final pillar is their choice of sacred language. Before this movement, high theology was almost exclusively conducted in Sanskrit, a language entirely reserved for the elite and the highly educated. The Alvards bypassed all of that by writing in Tamil, the language of the everyday people. This was a profound linguistic revolution. By later elevating these Tamil hymns to the exact same sacred status as the Sanskrit Vedas, Ramanuja made spirituality universally accessible, a real game changer. When you put all this together, it's honestly like standing in a field of luminous sound. Each of the Alvars radiated a totally different emotional frequency. Nammalvar brought profound depth. Andal brought fierce romantic love. Tirupan offered radical humility. Kulasekara provided steadfast loyalty. Periyalwar modeled intense parental devotion. And Madhurakavi embodied total surrender. Together, these distinct voices wove into a single cosmic hymn. They functioned, quite literally, as the emotional DNA of Ramanuja's philosophy. Section 3. The Neuroscience of Poetry. It's really easy to look back at these mystics through a purely historical lens, right? But what happens when we apply modern science? So the crucial point is this. The ecstasy and devotion the Alvars wrote about were causing actual, measurable chemical changes in the brain. The intense devotion expressed in their poetry directly correlates with increased levels of oxytocin and serotonin. They were literally manipulating their own brain chemistry through the power of ecstatic verse. And the science goes even deeper. By engaging with this specific type of poetry, multiple brain regions are activated all at once. The rhythmic nature of their songs actively regulates the human nervous system. Their intense use of metaphor expands cognitive flexibility. And get this, the act of group chanting actually induces coherence in human brainwaves. The twist here is that the Alvars weren't just wandering ecstatic poets. They were brilliant, intuitive neuroengineers. They used rhythm, metaphor, and melody as actual tools to rewire the human mind. Mind-blowing, right? Section 4. The universe is a poem. As we bring all these threads together, we see that they didn't just leave behind some ancient texts. They left behind a completely different way of seeing reality itself. Ramanuja realized that if you strip away the poetry, the logic just falls flat. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. What if we stopped trying to purely logic our way through existence? What if we finally remember that the universe is not only a physical body to be studied, but fundamentally it is a poem to be sung?